very important tip on preparing your paper properly before you start. So for all the lessons that I'm going to show, I'm using cold press watercolour paper. It's a 300 GSM, £140, and it's got texture. So cold press paper has a slight texture to the surface. So this is the paper that I'm going to be using, as I say, throughout the classes. And some people will just open their pad and start painting straight away onto the paper. There's nothing wrong with enthusiasm. However, I'm sure you've all had those situations where you're painting a particular scene or painting and you find that your paper ends up with grooves, with ridges, with furrows in the surface, and then you end up with puddles of watercolour and your smooth surface has disappeared. So what I'm going to show you now is what I do to prepare the paper. So the first thing I do is take a sheet of paper and I pop it in the sink of water, cold water, and I'll leave it in there to soak for around 10 minutes. Some people do it for longer. I find 10 minutes is adequate. And then when that time has lapsed, I'll tape it down to my board. So here's one I prepared earlier. So I'm just going to nip off, grab the wet paper and show you how we get it onto the board. And here we are, my wet paper. So the first thing you want to do is let any excess water drip off and then curl your paper up and have the centre of it land on your board first, and then just let it lay down. Just make sure I've got that square. There we go. And because it's soaking wet, it will adhere nicely to the board. And then the next thing you need to do is get hold of some gummed tape. This is a roll of gummed tape. It lasts forever. They come in huge rolls, and you'll find one side is matte and one side is shiny, and that's the side that has the glue. It's no good using normal masking tape at this stage because your paper's so wet, it's not going to stick to it. So gum tape is the way to go. I do know some people like to also staple. I find that's just a bit too much. I don't go down the stapling route. And then I just come in just a little way from the edge. Depends how much of a border you need for the mount that you're going to use. So you could measure your mount first, draw lines around your paper so that you know you're not going too far in. So I've cut my gummed paper to size. I'm just wetting it. And you're going to have so much better results now you're doing this. And it needs to be left overnight, preferably to dry out. In the summertime, if your house is particularly warm, you can leave it a bit less than that until it's dried through. But generally, I prepare mine in advance. It could be days in advance, it doesn't matter, so long as you've gone through this process. And what's happening to the paper, because we've soaked it, all the fibres have expanded, okay, so it's stretched. That's what the stretching refers to. The fibres, I've cut that bit of paper quite long, never mind. Yeah, it stretches, it swells up, and then as it's drying, those fibres shrink back to its former size and shape. And then when you come to do your painting, it doesn't swell up again. It's done it once, it won't do it again. How bizarre is that? But it's true. So as I say, I do, because I paint a lot, I do 4 or 5 each time I do this, have multiple boards, and just leave them to dry overnight. There we go. That's all done. Just make sure it's nicely adhered to the edges. The one downside is with the brown tape, when you come to remove your artwork, the brown tape won't come off the paper. It's glued onto the paper. So you have to use a craft knife and cut around the edge. But if you've already measured your paper and you know that that's going to fit inside your mount size, let me just grab a mount. We've got one here somewhere. So you know that none of that brown stuff is going to show in your finished painting. And that's how you stretch your paper.